They laughed when he said his grandfather was the governor of California. But 1 hour later, a black SUV pulled up and history walked through the door. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The rain had stopped just before sunrise, leaving a sheen on the school parking lot that made it look like glass. Ethan stepped off the bus with his backpack clutched tight to his chest, hoodie up, eyes low. He walked past a row of parents' cars and glances that lingered a second too long. Today wasn't just any day. It was Family History Presentation Day in Coach Haver's civics class, and Ethan knew exactly what that meant. As he entered the hallway, voices already filled the air. The loud kind. The kind that weren't afraid of being heard. Just ahead, two boys leaned against the lockers, Braden and Tyler, the usual suspects. One held a prop military medal, the other a printout of his grandfather next to a tank. Both already mid-performance. My grandpa fought in Desert Storm, Braden said, loud enough for the walls to hear. Real patriot, not like these fake stories. Tyler grinned. Yeah, like that kid who said his grandpa was a governor or something. What was his name again? Braden's eyes found Ethan. Oh, right, Ethan. Laughter. Not the kind that came from joy. This one had sharp edges. Ethan didn't stop walking. He had learned that if you walked like noise didn't matter, sometimes the world got quieter. But today it didn't. In first period, he sat near the back, hoping the chatter would die down. It didn't. Every few minutes, someone would turn around and whisper something. Governor's grandson, Mr. Olympia bloodline. Probably invented democracy, too. Even the teacher, Ms. Penner, gave a tight smile when she handed him his worksheet, like she wasn't sure whether to pity him or scold him for dreaming too big. By second period, Ethan kept his head down completely. He was supposed to give his presentation in third. He hadn't told anyone what he'd prepared, not even his closest friend, Jamal. What he had written wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't even polished, but it was the truth. Third period arrived like a freight train. Coach Haver stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, booming voice already cutting the air. All right, scholars, time to meet the people who made you. You got 3 minutes to tell us about the person who built your backbone. No politics, no lies, and no improv. He looked directly at Ethan when he said that last part. Names were called. Kids walked to the front, told stories about veterans, farmers, doctors, even a pizza franchise founder. Each got polite claps, a few wows, and a nod from Coach. Then he read the next name. Ethan Rowe. The room went still for a half second. Then someone in the back mumbled, "Here comes a governor." Laughter again. Quieter this time, but crueler. Ethan stood, slow and deliberate. He walked to the front with a kind of silence that only came from someone who didn't want to take up space. He placed a small, slightly worn photo on the projector desk. It showed a tall man in a dark suit shaking hands with school children. The man's jawline was unmistakable. So was the handshake. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger. A couple kids snickered. My grandfather, Ethan began, voice soft but steady, was Arnold Schwarzenegger, former governor of California. Before that, a world champion bodybuilder. Before that, just a kid from Austria who didn't speak English and dreamed about America. He paused. The room didn't laugh this time, just stared. I didn't bring a medal or a trophy. I brought this photo. It was taken 2 weeks before he left office. He told me once that shaking hands with a second grader meant more to him than shaking hands with presidents, because it reminded him who he was doing all this for. Coach Haver cleared his throat, but said nothing. Ethan continued. People say I'm lying, that I made it up, because I live in a 2-bedroom apartment and ride the bus alone, because I don't look like a governor's grandson. But my grandpa taught me something. You don't wear legacy on your wrist. You earn it with your actions. Someone shifted in their seat. Another coughed. Coach Haver looked like he was about to interrupt, but Ethan kept going. He never gave me a car, never gave me money. What he gave me was a rule. Be useful, then be better, then be quiet about it. That's what I try to do, every day, even when people laugh. The bell rang, but no one moved. Coach Haver broke the silence. Take your seat, Ro. Ethan walked back down the aisle. But something in the room had changed. The air was thicker. He wasn't sure if it was anger or awe or guilt. Maybe all three. Then Braden said it. Photoshop's really good these days. A few snickers returned, louder this time. And just like that, the mood snapped. Coach Haver didn't say a word. Neither did the other students. Ethan sat down. He didn't look at anyone. He just stared at the photo still sitting on the desk. The corners slightly curled from being handled too much. To him, it wasn't proof. It was memory. But deep inside that silence, something had cracked. And the echo of it was about to travel far beyond that classroom. Under the fluorescent hallway lights of Westgate Middle School, Ethan kept his head low, eyes fixed on the scuffed tile floor as the late bell echoed through the corridor. He wasn't late. He was early, as always. He just didn't like being seen. Not since the day before. Not since the lie everyone believed he told. As he approached his locker, a familiar voice slithered down the hall. Well, if it isn't the governor's grandson, Tyler Haver said, his smirk leading the pack of boys behind him. Hey, Ethan, what's it like being royalty? The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp, precise, enough to sting. Ethan didn't respond. He turned his lock slowly, methodically, pretending not to hear, even as a thick silence grew around him. The moment he opened the locker door, a cascade of balled-up paper and crumpled candy wrappers tumbled out. Tyler clapped mockingly. Guess the governor forgot to send the maid today. Ethan bent down, cleaning the mess with quiet hands. Behind him, one of the boys mimicked a trumpet. All hail King Ethan of California. The words bit, but he didn't let them see the flinch. He'd learned early that silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. Across the hallway, a few students stood still, unsure whether to laugh or look away. Maya Ramirez, always observant, lingered longer than most. Her brow furrowed as she watched Tyler knock a notebook from Ethan's hand. The spiral-bound pages fluttered down the hall like leaves caught in the wind. Coach Haver appeared at the far end of the hallway, clipboard in hand, whistle around his neck, oblivious to the moment unfolding, or worse, choosing to ignore it. He walked right past the scene, offering nothing more than a nod toward his son, and a glance at Ethan, whose shoulders had stiffened under the weight of invisibility. First period began with the kind of heaviness that only the young understand, when dignity is stripped before an audience and there's nothing you can do but keep breathing. Ethan took his seat in the back row of homeroom, shrinking behind his desk as the teacher called roll. When she said his name, she didn't look up. Here, Ethan muttered. Tyler, 3 seats ahead, turned just enough for Ethan to see the corner of his grin. Maybe next time just teleport in, right? Like all those government elites do, he whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. At lunch, the tension shifted from whispers to spectacle. Ethan walked into the cafeteria with his tray balanced carefully in both hands, eyes scanning for a quiet table. Anywhere not in a direct line of fire. He'd nearly made it to the corner when Tyler slid a tray across the seat opposite him and plopped down with practiced arrogance. You know, I talked to my dad. Tyler began, stabbing a grape with his plastic fork. He says there's no record of your grandpa ever doing anything in California politics. Weird, right? Ethan said nothing. Maybe he meant governor of, like, a video game server? Tyler chuckled at his own joke as 2 other boys joined in. Or was it some bodybuilder fantasy? You know, like the guy from all those action movies? What's his name again? The name hung unspoken, the implication clear. Ethan felt the burn behind his eyes, but refused to let it show. He's not lying. Maya's voice cut through the noise like a crack of thunder. The table froze. Maya stood a few feet away, tray in hand, expression unreadable. What? Tyler laughed, faltering slightly. I said he's not lying. She looked directly at Ethan, then back at Tyler. And you're not funny. You're scared. That's why you need a crowd. The cafeteria held its breath. Tyler's eyes narrowed. Stay out of it, Ramirez. She sat down beside Ethan without asking. Why? So you can keep playing alpha in a middle school cafeteria? Grow up. A teacher stepped into view near the vending machines, glancing around the room. The noise resumed in fragments, but the air didn't settle. Tyler stood abruptly, tray in hand. "Whatever," he mumbled, walking off, but the usual swagger in his step was gone. Ethan didn't speak. He just looked at Maya, searching for an angle, a motive, anything. But her gaze was steady. "You don't have to say it," she said. "I saw how they looked at you. I've seen it before. People only believe power when it looks a certain way. Your story scared them because it didn't fit." Ethan blinked, uncertain of how to respond. Part of him wanted to explain everything. Part of him wanted to disappear again. "Thanks," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Don't thank me yet," Maya replied, pulling out her phone. "My cousin's in Sacramento. Politics nerd. I sent him your name last night. He thinks he found something. And if I'm right, those boys won't be laughing much longer." Ethan stared, unsure if she was joking or serious. But in her expression, he saw something he hadn't in a long time: conviction. The cafeteria noise blurred around them. Plates clattered. Voices echoed. But at that small lunch table near the corner, something had shifted, not just for Ethan, for the story itself. And in that moment, he didn't know what was coming. But he knew this. He wasn't alone anymore. And someone, somewhere, had started listening. The following morning, the air in Westgate felt different. Not lighter, just still, like the school itself was holding its breath. Ethan noticed at the moment he stepped through the front doors. Whispers didn't swirl around in the way they used to. Eyes still followed him. But this time, there was hesitation in them. Something had changed. And that something was waiting for him outside the principal's office. It started during third period, when the intercom crackled overhead. A pause. Then the secretary's voice. "Ethan Walker, please report to front office." The entire class turned. Chairs creaked. Pencils stopped moving. Ethan stood slowly, gathering his things in silence, heart already thudding against his ribs. Tyler smirked across the room, leaning back his seat like he'd just won something. As Ethan walked the corridor toward the front office, the buzzing in his ears grew louder. He couldn't tell if it was panic, dread, or just another memory from yesterday bleeding into the present. All he knew was that his palms were sweating, and he had no idea what was waiting on the other side of the door. Inside the office, the secretary barely looked up. "Take a seat," she said. "Principal Dawkins will be with you shortly." Ethan sat down in the worn leather chair across from the glass door. Beyond the frosted panel, he could hear muffled voices. Dawkins and someone else, calm, firm, but unfamiliar. A few minutes passed. Then the door opened. Principal Dawkins stepped out, his tie slightly crooked, expression unreadable. "Ethan," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Come on in." Ethan followed him into the office. It smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in streaks of late morning light. Across from the desk sat two people, a woman in a navy blazer and a tall man in uniform. The woman looked up first. "Ethan Walker?" she asked, voice soft but direct. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Assistant Superintendent Lane. This is Lieutenant Carson from the State Education Oversight Board. We're here regarding a complaint filed yesterday afternoon." Ethan blinked. "A complaint?" Principal Dawkins cleared his throat. "It's about an incident in the cafeteria involving verbal harassment and public humiliation." He leaned forward slightly. "We've received several written statements. One from Maya Ramirez, two others anonymously." The room fell quiet. Ethan didn't know what to say. He looked down at his shoes. "Ethan," the lieutenant said, his voice firm but kind, "we want to make sure students feel safe, respected. Can you walk us through what happened? Just in your own words." Ethan hesitated. Then, slowly, he began to speak. About the hallway. About the tray in the cafeteria. About the jokes. About the notebook that had been kicked down the stairs on Monday. None of it came out smoothly. But it came out, and that was enough. When he finished, no one spoke for a moment. Lane nodded, scribbling something in her notepad. Dawkins tried to cut in. "While these are certainly serious matters, I do believe they've been blown a bit out of. With respect, Principal Dawkins," Lane interrupted. "We'll be handling the evaluation independently." We've already spoken to several staff members this morning, and we'll continue throughout the day. The room tightened. Dobkins sat back, lips pressed together. Lane turned back to Ethan. There's one more thing, Ethan. Is it true that you told your peers your grandfather was a former governor? Ethan hesitated. Dobkins jumped in again, tone laced with a patronizing chuckle. Yes, that's what I've been trying to address. These stories, this kind of exaggeration, can sometimes cause confusion, even lead to conflict. I didn't lie, Ethan said quietly, his voice suddenly sharper than before. Everyone looked at him. My grandfather is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Dobkins blinked, visibly trying to suppress a smirk. The lieutenant, however, leaned forward. You said Arnold Schwarzenegger? Ethan nodded. Lane exchanged a look with him. Ethan, do you have any documentation of that? Any way to verify the connection? I didn't bring anything to school, he replied. I didn't think I had to prove my family. Lane's voice softened. You shouldn't have to, but you'd be surprised how many false claims we get from students. Some looking for attention, some just misinformed. Ethan felt a familiar tightening in his chest. The same tightening he felt when his mother's letters were questioned, when the photographs on their wall were dismissed as photoshopped, when teachers assumed he'd made up the entire story for pity. Dobkins sighed. Perhaps it's time we all acknowledge the importance of honesty. Just then, the office door opened again. The secretary's voice called in from outside. Ms. Lane, there's someone here asking for you. Lane frowned. We're in a meeting, he said. His name is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Time stopped. Dobkins stood slowly, color draining from his face. Lane blinked once. The lieutenant sat back, arms folding. Outside, heavy footsteps approached the office. Would you like to begin chapter for The Governor Enters the Room, /900 words? I'm ready to write it with full cinematic power, layered emotion, and maximum audience payoff. The door didn't just open. It shifted the entire gravity of the room. A silence fell that wasn't empty. It was charged, electric. Everyone in Principal Dobkins's office turned. And then he stepped in, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Not in a suit, not with cameras. Just jeans, a leather jacket, and that unmistakable quiet presence that filled the space before his voice ever needed to. Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't been told. No warning. No heads up. But there he was, the man who had carried him on his shoulders at the county fair, who sent handwritten cards every birthday, who'd always reminded him. Character isn't what you post. It's what you protect. Lane stood immediately. Governor Schwarzenegger, we weren't expecting, I know. Arnold said calmly, voice deep but warm. I didn't come for cameras. I came for my grandson. Dobkins chuckled, a bit too loudly, trying to recover some semblance of control. Well, I think there's been some misunderstanding here. The boy made a claim, quite a bold one, and obviously we can't verify. Arnold turned to him, slow and steady. You mean the claim that he's my grandson? Dobkins shifted awkwardly. Well, yes, it seemed a bit far-fetched. Without another word, Arnold reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet. He handed it to Lane. She opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned, widened slightly, then looked up. It's a notarized family affidavit. His name, Ethan Walker, listed directly. Legal confirmation. Lieutenant Carson raised an eyebrow. This is more than sufficient. Dobkins paled slightly, his collar visibly damp. Well, be that as it may, there's still the matter of the disruptions. I mean, the hallway outburst, the cafeteria. He was defending his name. Arnold interrupted, still calm. Tell me something, Principal Dobkins. If a boy at this school told everyone his grandfather was a plumber, we'd be called into the office. Dobkins opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Arnold stepped forward, now standing beside Ethan. He didn't put a hand on his shoulder. He didn't need to. His presence alone did the talking. I taught Ethan not to use my name for favors, not to ask for handouts. That's why you didn't know. That's why most of the world didn't know. But when a boy gets mocked, humiliated, publicly shamed for telling the truth, that's not a discipline problem. That's a culture problem. The words hung in the air like smoke after a detonation. No one moved. Lane glanced at the lieutenant. Then she turned back to Dobkins. Principal, we'll need full access to student and staff statements from the past week. Also, surveillance footage from the cafeteria and hallway incidents. Dobkins tried to object, but the words shriveled before they reached his lips. And as for Ethan, Lane continued, now addressing the boy directly. I want to formally apologize on behalf of the district. You should never have been put in this position. Ethan blinked. He didn't know what to say. After days of being pushed down, brushed aside, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be believed. Arnold turned to him now, voice quieter. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand in truth while the world tries to shrink you. You did that. I'm proud of you. Ethan nodded, swallowing back everything that threatened to rise. Lane cleared her throat. Governor, would you be willing to speak to the school board? I think hearing from you directly could help us set a different tone. I didn't come to make a speech, Arnold said. Then, with a glance at Ethan, he added, but maybe it's time some walls got rebuilt around here. The meeting ended not with handshakes, but with a shift in temperature. The kind that only happens when something deeper than protocol is corrected, when justice breathes again. As they exited the office, Ethan felt it. Not the eyes, not the whispers, but something new, a widening silence down the hallway, filled with faces that no longer sneered, no longer smirked, just stared, some with guilt, some with wonder, and one or two, like Maya Ramirez, with something close to hope. Arnold didn't say much as they walked. Just before leaving through the side entrance, he paused, looked up at the school's old bricks, and said, funny thing about walls, they either keep people out or remind them what's worth protecting. Then he opened the door, sunlight flooding in. Would you like to begin Chapter 5, the Assembly, /900 words? I'm ready to deliver the next emotional peak with cinematic tension and social resonance. The gymnasium was never silent. Not during pep rallies, not during sports meets, and certainly never during mandatory assemblies. But that morning, you could hear a dropped pencil from across the bleachers. No music played, no overhead announcements. Just a low hum of students whispering, speculating, trying to make sense of what was about to unfold. The entire school was there, packed shoulder to shoulder under the flickering lights and peeling championship banners. Ethan sat in the second row near the center, still unsure why he had been asked to be there so early. No one told him what was planned. But when Principal Dobkins walked onto the stage, his usual confidence replaced with stiffness in his step. Ethan sensed something was different. Dobkins adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and tried to smile. Good morning, students. We have a special guest today. Someone who represents the values of resilience, discipline, and truth. Someone who, well, I'll let him speak for himself. There was a pause. Then the gym doors opened. He didn't rush in. He walked. Calm, measured. Every eye turned. Every mouth froze mid-word. Arnold Schwarzenegger, walking down the center aisle of a high school gym, wearing a simple black shirt and blazer. No entourage. No spotlight. Just presence. The kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice to silence a crowd. Some of the students gasped. A few reached instinctively for their phones before remembering they weren't allowed. But most just watched, stunned, as the man many had only seen on screens climbed onto the stage and stood at the mic. He looked out over the crowd. No smile, just the faintest nod. I wasn't supposed to be here today, he began, but I heard that a boy was mocked. Not for lying, but for telling the truth. That got my attention. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A few heads turned toward Ethan. His name is Ethan, Arnold continued. He didn't ask for attention. He didn't wave my name around. He did what I taught him to do, stand with dignity, even when it's easier to disappear. He paused, letting the silence grow heavier. I've been called many things in my life. Champion, governor, movie star. But the title I'm proudest of is Grandpa. And when my grandson tells someone who he is, and they laugh, that's not his failure. That's theirs. Someone in the back coughed. No one else moved. When I was young, I had an accent. I was mocked for it, told I'd never succeed in America, that I was too bulky, too foreign, Too dumb. But I learned something. You don't need permission to dream. You don't need approval to be proud of your family. His voice dropped lower. What you need is courage. And sometimes that courage is just saying who you are, loudly, even when it shakes. Ethan looked down. His hands were clenched, nails digging into his palm. But for the first time in days, the sting didn't come from shame. It came from something else. Pride. Arnold turned slightly, gesturing to the rows of students. Many of you don't know who you're sitting next to. Some of you have brothers overseas. Some of your moms work double shifts. Some of your dads were denied jobs because of how they look. Don't let ignorance turn into cruelty. The words struck deep. You could feel the air shift. I came here today, he said, not because of a scandal, not because of social media, but because when someone tells the truth and the world slaps them down, it's our job to lift them up. He looked directly at Ethan now, a long, quiet look that said everything without words. Then he turned back to the mic. To those who laughed, it's time to grow up. To those who stayed silent, it's time to speak. And to those who ever felt like they didn't belong, you do. Applause didn't start instantly. It wasn't forced. It built, slowly, one hand, then another, then the ripple became a wave. And for the first time since the cafeteria, Ethan didn't feel like a boy shrinking under stairs. He felt like someone who had survived something and had been seen. Arnold stepped down. As he passed Ethan, he didn't say anything, just reached out, briefly squeezed his shoulder, then walked back down the center aisle. A few students leaned aside, giving him room like he was a storm passing through. Dobkins tried to regain the stage, voice quivering slightly. Let's all take this moment as a learning opportunity. But no one was listening, because something had shifted. And when Ethan stood to leave, this time, they didn't laugh. They didn't whisper. They watched, some with regret, some with awe, and one or two with a glint of respect. The next morning, everything felt different. Not because the school had changed overnight, but because Ethan had. He walked through the front doors not like a boy hiding behind his hoodie, but like someone who finally remembered where he came from. Whispers still followed him down the hallway, but they didn't land the same way anymore. They weren't sharp. They were curious, hesitant, and a few even sounded apologetic. By third period, an announcement crackled over the intercom. Ethan Koenig, please report to principal's office. A hush swept the room. Even Mr. Neely, who rarely looked up from his crossword puzzle, raised an eyebrow. Ethan gathered his things slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't slouch. And as he stepped into the hallway, he didn't notice the way some of his classmates watched him with the strange awareness that comes only after watching someone stand where they were expected to fall. The walk to the office was quiet. Too quiet. No teachers chatting in the break room. No students lingering by lockers. Just the soft echo of his own footsteps. When he arrived, the door was already open. Principal Dobkins was seated behind his desk, fingers laced, face unreadable. Beside him stood Coach Haver, arms crossed, jaw tight, the same way he looked before screaming during halftime. And on the far side of the room sat Mrs. Carrington, the district superintendent, impeccably dressed, eyes scanning Ethan like she was auditing a spreadsheet. Have a seat, Ethan, Dobkins said. Ethan did. There was a silence that stretched a bit too long, like they were waiting for him to squirm. He didn't. Dobkins cleared his throat. First, let me say, yesterday was quite a spectacle. Haver shifted uncomfortably. Carrington didn't blink. We've received multiple emails, Dobkins continued. Parents, students, even media inquiries. And while we don't condone bullying in any form, we also recognize that things can be misunderstood. Ethan frowned. Carrington spoke next. Her voice was crisp, clipped. Ethan, we want to offer you a formal apology. The district believes in inclusion, respect. We do not tolerate mockery, especially when it concerns family. Ethan nodded slowly. But something in her tone felt hollow, like reading from a legal memo. Haver still hadn't looked him in the eye. Then Dobkins slid a folder across the desk. We're drafting a statement. The school will post it on our official channels. It will clarify that your grandfather is, in fact, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that any previous comments made about you were uncalled for. That's not what this is about, Ethan said, his voice calm. Haver finally looked up. Excuse me? It's not about proving who my grandfather is, Ethan said. It's about how people treated me when they thought I was lying. Like I was less. Like I deserved it. Dobkins raised his hands, slightly, tried to maintain control. We're handling it, Ethan. The situation is, no, Ethan interrupted. You're handling the PR, not the people. Carrington's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. Then Ethan turned, locking eyes with Haver. You let it. You made it worse. Haver scoffed. Oh, come on. I was joking. No, you weren't, Ethan said. You humiliated me in front of the team. You laughed. You called me Hollywood and told me to run laps until I remembered I wasn't special. Carrington shifted uncomfortably. Ethan turned back to Dobkins. You let it happen. You saw the cafeteria video. You didn't stop it. Dobkins looked down at the desk. Ethan stood up. So you want to apologize? Fine. But don't apologize because of who my grandfather is. Apologize because I should have been treated better, whether he was Arnold Schwarzenegger or a janitor. The room fell silent again. Carrington finally spoke, softer now. Ethan, what would you like us to do? Ethan hesitated. Then he took a breath. Start with Coach Haver. Make him say it to my face. Not on a paper. Not in a tweet. But in front of the team. The same way he mocked me. Haver bristled. This is ridiculous. Ethan didn't move. Then maybe you don't belong here. The words landed like a slap. Dobkins looked at Carrington. She gave the faintest nod. We'll arrange it, she said. Today. Ethan nodded. Good. As he turned to leave, Dobkins called out, Ethan, one more thing. He paused at the door. Your grandfather, he said something yesterday. About courage. About saying who you are, even when it shakes. I just want you to know you did that, and it mattered. Ethan didn't smile, but he nodded. Thanks. He left the office, walking straighter than he ever had before. Not because things were fixed, but because now people had heard him, and they were finally starting to listen. The gym was unusually silent. No basketballs echoing off hardwood, no squeak of sneakers or banter between teammates. Just rows of students lined up on the bleachers, buzzing with anticipation. The entire football team was there, still in partial gear from morning drills. Teachers flanked the walls. Even janitors had paused their routines, leaning against mop handles, sensing that something more important than a cleaning schedule was unfolding. At the center of it all stood Coach Haver, arms crossed, jaw clenched, looking like a man who'd spent the last 20 years shouting, but had suddenly forgotten how to speak. Ethan stood across from him, wearing the same hoodie from last week, though it looked different now. It fit like armor. The room didn't tilt under him anymore. Principal Dobkins stepped forward, clipboard in hand, clearing his throat. We've gathered here today because sometimes a school teaches more outside the classroom than inside it. He looked at Haver. Coach. Haver stared at the floor. The pause dragged. Then, finally, he looked up at Ethan. His voice was low, rough. Ethan, I was wrong. The crowd hushed even further. I let my ego get ahead of my responsibility. I mocked you. I let others follow my lead. I didn't ask who you were, and when you told us, I laughed louder instead. That wasn't leadership. That was cowardice. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't nod. He just listened. Haver continued, the words catching. I've been a coach for 20 years. Thought I knew how to judge character. But I judged you based on a story I didn't bother to hear. And it took your grandfather walking into my locker room to show me just how small I'd become. Gasps rippled through the students. Some hadn't heard about what happened after the game. Ethan hadn't told anyone. But now, the memory returned in full color. Just after the locker room had cleared that night, Arnold walked in. Quiet. No entourage. No cameras. Just him. And Coach Haver, still riding the fumes of power, had looked up, sneered, and said, So the Terminator really is real. Arnold had looked at him with that same weighty stillness he once used on Senate floors and movie sets, then said just one line. Real men don't wait for cameras to do the right thing. Then he walked away. He didn't need to say more. And now, Haver was quoting that silence like it was scripture. I'm sorry, Ethan, Haver said, not because of who your grandfather is, but because I failed the man you are. Ethan stepped forward. He didn't respond with applause or indignation. He simply nodded. A quiet acceptance, not of the words, but the change. And in the silence that followed, it was clear something had shifted. The team stood straighter. The coaches folded their arms a little looser. Even the bleachers creaked with a sense of something being released. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself sitting on a bench outside the school, the last bell long gone. A soft breeze picked up, rustling the edge of a folded letter in his pocket. He pulled it out slowly. Handwritten, thick paper. No seal, just his name across the front, in a familiar, bold script. He unfolded it. Ethan, I've lived 100 lifetimes in one. I've worn medals, stood behind podiums, and made decisions that changed cities. But the hardest thing I've ever done was learn to stay silent and let the next generation speak. You don't need my name to carry you. You carry yourself. And yesterday you carried me too. Proud doesn't cover it. Love, Grandpa. Ethan blinked back the burn in his eyes. A shadow fell across the bench. You hungry? Arnold asked. Ethan smiled without looking up. Depends. You cooking? Arnold laughed. That's a no, then. They started walking down the sidewalk together. No spotlight. No crowd. Just a grandfather and his grandson. 2 generations of strength that didn't need to be loud to be felt. At the next football game, Ethan stood at the edge of the field. He was on the starting lineup. He didn't need to be. Coach Havard asked him to lead the team out. And for the first time, the team followed, not because of fear, but because of respect. In the bleachers, someone nudged their friend. That's Ethan, his grandpa's. The other replied before they could finish. Yeah, but he didn't need him to prove it. And down on the field, Ethan smiled, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but because he finally understood. Legacy isn't about names etched in history books. It's about quiet strength in loud rooms. It's about choosing dignity when humiliation would have been easier. It's about walking back into the fire, not to be seen, but to be heard. And this time, everyone was listening.